Hey friends, this is Arie of Pups Unleashed Dog Training. Today we will be going through the steps for teaching your dog the skill, drop it. Drop it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a skill that you will use to tell your dog to release something that they already have in their mouth. So you can use this for things that they are allowed to have, like if you're playing fetch or tug, and you can also use it for things that your dog is not allowed to have. Like if they pick up a toxic food, like a human food like chocolate that's toxic to dogs, something like a medicine bottle, something outside that could be potentially dangerous or make them sick, like an animal carcass, really anything that they have in their mouth that they're not supposed to have. It's really useful for puppies too because they tend to steal a lot of things, so socks, shoes, household items. It can be used for any of those. This skill can be a little bit tricky to teach because once a dog has something that they want in their mouth, to get them to surrender it, you really have to convince them that you have something better than what they have. So we'll go through a way that will teach them that if they give up that thing that they have, you are likely to give them something even better. That's really the trick to training a strong drop it instead of a drop it that your dog will only really respond to sometimes. Before teaching the skill drop it, you want to obtain your high value training food. That way you have something on hand to motivate your dog. Remember that this skill is a little tricky for dogs to learn, so you want to use something that is more high value than, say, kibble or maybe even your basic like crunchy dog treat. You want something that typically is soft and that your dog really, really likes. Like, for example, plain cooked meat tends to be a really good one for this type of skill, or one of the training treats that's soft and your dog really, really likes. The first step to teaching drop it is a little counterintuitive because you don't actually ask your dog to surrender anything in the first stage of teaching this skill. The first stage is just giving meaning to those words. This step is called charging the cue. And what it does is it gives a positive association to the words drop it. So what you do in this step is you just say, drop it, and then you throw some of that high value training food on the floor, praise your dog as they eat it, point it out if they lose sight of where it goes, and you just repeat this over and over again. Ideally, you do this for a few days before you expect any sort of other performance out of your dog as far as moving to future steps. But if you really need to train it in one day, as far as starting the process, you can do this for several trials and then you can move on to the next step. But essentially, the more time you spend on this step, the better, because you're giving your dog a really positive association with the words drop it. The other thing that this does is it also teaches your dog to orient their attention towards the floor when they hear those words, which will come in handy when they spit something out that they previously had in their mouth and then they start looking for food. Because then you have that moment of time to take whatever the object was that they aren't supposed to have and replace it with something else as they're looking around for food on the floor. So it's a really, really useful step, and it's a step that sometimes people skip, and I never recommend skipping this step because it makes the entire process much easier and it trains a much stronger drop it. It just takes a little bit more time. The second step in teaching drop it is to start requiring your dog to surrender something. So as far as what you use, it doesn't matter too much, but you have to find something that your dog is likely to put in their mouth. So for that reason, oftentimes toys work really well for this stage of training. If there's something else you can offer your dog that you know they'll pick up, like if they love, toilet paper rolls or something, feel free to use it, but you want to pick something that you know they're going to pick up easily. You're going to offer that object to your dog, and if you're using a toy, having a play session is a great way to really facilitate this. So get them a little riled up so they're playing, they have their toy in their mouth for either tug or fetch. And then what you do is you say the words, drop it, just like you did in step one.
Oh boy.
If your dog immediately spits out that object, then that's great, praise, and then give them a reward right away as you take away the object that they spit out. That's not incredibly likely to happen the first time because it's the first time you trained it. So what's more likely is that your dog will look at you with some sort of recognition of those words because you did the previous step, but they probably won't spit the object out yet. So then what you do is you take your training food, you put it right in front of their nose, and as soon as they sniff that high value food, they're going to spit out the thing that they have in their mouth. When they drop whatever that object is, you're going to take it, and then you're going to release that food to them. It does help if you take the object first and then give them the food, because then what happens in later stages is your dog is already used to you taking something away before you give that food reward. So you don't have to worry about, trying to quickly snatch that thing away if it's a real life situation, because your dog is used to being patient and waiting for the reward until after you take that thing away. And then the other really important thing here in this step is that you give back whatever the object was. After you've taken it, given the food, then give that object back. Because then what it does is it teaches your dog that drop it doesn't mean they're losing that object permanently. It just means they're surrendering it for a short period of time, they're getting a really great reward, and then they're going to get it back, which helps them feel more secure in giving that up in the first place, because they don't think it's going to be gone forever. Dogs don't like to surrender resources. So if you get this sort of idea in their mind that they're going to get it back anyway, it is very, very helpful to the training process. So we keep it positive and we keep lots of rewards coming with this skill. Once your dog is consistently spitting out that object when you say the words drop it and you wave food in front of their nose, the next step is to fade out that treat lure that you're using to make them drop the object. So this just takes a lot of practice. So in the previous step, you want to practice over and over and over again. And eventually what will happen is when you say drop it and you wait a second before you wave that food in front of their nose, eventually they will start just dropping the object first. When you start to see that, then it's a pretty good indication that you don't need that food lure anymore. So what you would do is several rounds of having something in your dog's mouth, like a toy, for example, you saying drop it, and then you taking that object and rewarding in exchange for that object with that high value food. And then just as before, give that object right back if it's something they're allowed to have. Because again, that makes them feel really secure with giving something away because they know it's coming right back to them. This step can be hard for some dogs depending on how possessive they are of their resources. So it's important to always be reading your dog's body language while you're practicing drop it as well, because the last thing that you want is some type of resource guarding situation on your hands when you're training this. So if at some point you notice your dog is growling, or they're getting really stiff, or they have a hard stare, or any other stress signals, it's a good indication that this is not something you should be working on your own, and it's time to hire a professional trainer, because if your dog is resource guarding while you're practicing drop it, that could be a potential bite hazard situation. If drop it is trained properly and your dog doesn't have resource guarding issues, before you start this process, it actually helps to prevent resource guarding if you train it properly, because your dog feels secure. But if your dog has been a resource guarder historically, this will be difficult for them. So this is one of those skills where you do want to bring in a professional trainer that's force-free and reward-based to teach drop it with you if your dog has resource guarding issues or shows any sort of indication of those as you start to train it. Once your dog gets good at surrendering an object freely without you having to use that treat lure, then what you're going to do is just make this a little bit harder by catching your dog off guard when they have something in their mouth. So instead of setting up formal training sessions where they pretty quickly get the hang of what you're doing because they learn the pattern that you're just doing drop it over and over again, then what you're going to do is look for situations where your dog has something in their mouth that you could almost catch them off guard or catch the moment. And let's say you walk past your dog and they're gnawing on something, right? So have some of that high value training food in your pocket, walk up to them, say drop it. When they do, you're gonna take that object, give them that delicious food, and then give that object right back. And again, you're watching their body language. If they're in any way defensive or stressed out about this, it's not a good thing to do with them. You're looking for a dog that is comfortable with the fact that they're giving that up, and then you're going to return it. So always read their body language. Slow wagging tail, relaxed body, those are all good signs, but stiffness, growling, that's no good. So make sure you monitor them. But if you practice this skill in those little teachable moments that happen throughout the day, it is a great way to make this behavior much more consistent. If drop it is only taught using toys and it's only taught in formal training sessions, it'll be really, really hard for your dog to actually drop something when it's an everyday situation and it's clearly not a training session. They're less likely to do it. So you want to start using this throughout the day instead of just doing drop it sessions over and over and over again. The next step of this is to also start working on drop it in various scenarios and situations that are outside of your house. So it's great to practice this at first in your house, but then you want to start using this outside. You want to start using it on walks, other places, other locations. That way your dog learns that they don't just have to drop it in your house. They have to be able to do this skill elsewhere. And the more objects you practice this with, the better. Because the more generalized it is, then the more likely it is that if your dog picks up something they've never had before and you say those words, they will still surrender it because they are in such a habit of doing that behavior in the first place that it's not difficult for them to surrender something that they've never had before. And again, whenever possible, you give that object back. There are obviously going to be situations where you can't do that, right? Because this is a safety skill. You want to have this if your dog picks up something they can't have. But as much as possible when you're training it, you want to give that object back if you can, if it's something they're allowed to have. That way, they get used to that pattern. And if they have something that you can't give back to them, like let's say they stole a shoe, you're not going to give the shoe back once they drop it, you give them something else. So give them that food reward and then give them a toy. So you redirect them to a better activity and they don't feel like they've lost something. So if you do all of that, it really helps your dog feel secure in having their resources instead of protective of them. And it helps you know that you have this safety skill that you can use if your dog gets a hold of something they shouldn't have. There are some common areas where you are more likely to have issues when training drop it. So these are your troubleshooting tips for the skill drop it. One area that sometimes people have trouble is to just get their dog to take an object into their mouth in the first place. Because once your dog knows you have food, they sort of pick up on the pattern and they know you're practicing that skill. So a lot of times what they'll do is just kind of wait for the food and not really put something in their mouth. So there's a couple of ways you can go about that. What you can do if your dog really doesn't want to pick up a toy or a stick or, something they likely steal like shoes, you can opt for another food. And the food that you opt for should be something they can't finish quickly, because then you can give it to them, you can have them drop it, and then you can give it back again. So a good example would be something like a Kong that is stuffed with something that would take a while to get through, like frozen peanut butter or frozen wet food. Or another enrichment object, like there are all sorts of different little puzzles that are similar to Kongs in other brands. Nylabone, for example, makes a bunch of them. But something that is food related, so your dog's going to take it, but it's not a food they're going to finish quickly like a treat, because you're never going to get that from them. Dogs are way too fast. So let's say you're using a Kong, you would give your dog that stuffed Kong. After they have it for a couple of seconds, you would say drop it. You would exchange for that high value food you have, and then you would give that Kong right back. So then they can just continue on. So that way, they're going to have something in their mouth and it's not going to be a food they'll finish quickly. Another common area where people have issues with training this is that their dog doesn't want to spit out an object once they have it if you don't have food on you. So that just means your dog's not ready for that step. It's not that they don't know the behavior at all, but it's not strong enough of a drop it. So you have to do some more trials of you luring that object out of their mouth with that high value food. And then the other thing you want to be mindful of is the order in which you do things. So once your dog spits out the object, you take the object and then you give them the food. And that makes it more likely that you'll be able to get that object away from your dog and have that little grace period to then get them some sort of reward. So it just means more training is needed, and you might want to look at the order in which you are doing things. Those are the common areas where people have issues with drop it. If you have any more, just drop it down in the comments, and I can respond to you if you have other areas where you're struggling with this skill. As always, make sure that you like and subscribe. Check out some other videos if there's other skills you're looking at training, And remember, with Drop It, it takes a lot of patience, but it is so worth it because it's one of those skills that can help keep your dog safe if they get into something that is potentially dangerous. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.